In a mediation setting, what you have is the ability for two parties to face one another, sit down and actually articulate what they see as the problem.
It enables people to talk to each other, to learn about each other, and hopefully remind each other that they're actually working towards the same end.
Mediation is a form of disagreement or dispute resolution in which an independent person helps the parties find their own solution to the disagreement. The purpose of this video is to show how mediation works and to look at the benefits it can bring.
I think that the mediation process is very different, that it does enable people to sort of come on a more equal basis with a much more open mind to perhaps thinking about how they're going to resolve it.
Mediation is an optional voluntary process and one way of resolving disagreements about a child's special educational needs and how best to meet those needs.
It's really made me think about how I'm behaving and how actually you can use the skills of mediation to get something better out of a meeting.
Agreements aren't always reached during mediation, and it's not the job of the mediator to push for a solution. His or her role is to enable everyone to find their own ways of resolving the dispute. The most important thing is that the channels of communication are now open between the parents and the parties involved in a child's education.
We're often going into meetings where we're not saying very much, but just in getting the parents to be able to put across how they feel has often been very useful in the school understanding the parents' point of view.
So how does mediation work in practice? Mediations can take a number of routes and end in a number of possible outcomes. In this video, we use actors to illustrate aspects of mediation. Other participants all have experience of real mediations. In this scenario, Daniel transferred to secondary school last September. His mother requested a statutory assessment, but that was turned down. She has just lodged an appeal with the SEN Tribunal and has taken Daniel out of school in protest.
I've agreed to this mediation because I want to feel happy about sending Daniel back to school, and I want to make sure that he gets the help that he needs. He's a really good boy, Daniel, but he doesn't understand what he's meant to be doing in his lessons, and I want an assessment. They've said no. I can't leave it like that. Not while things are not right.
When we looked at Daniel's papers, we really didn't feel a statutory assessment was justified. He's been making consistent progress, and the school is confident that they have the right expertise. Jane Fitzpatrick, the Special Educational Needs Coordinator at the school, used to be in our learning support team. She's a qualified dyslexia specialist. At the moment, Daniel's main problem is he's not in school. That has to be the priority here today, to get him back into school. Then we can look at what the real problems are and what else the school can do to meet his needs.
I like English. The teacher helps me understand the things I've got to do and explains the worksheets for me. I wouldn't mind going back to school, but only if I could get more help. They keep on having these meetings, but nothing seems to happen.
Once Daniel's back in school, we need to look at what support he's getting in class and what else can be done to help him. The fact is, there wasn't enough evidence of Daniel having significant learning needs when we looked at the request for a statutory assessment. The Brown family are very angry now because they don't feel anything's being done. I'd like to be able to talk to Mrs. Brown again, take the anger and hostility out of the situation. The school should be able to meet all of Daniel's needs. They have the expertise.
Before the mediation takes place, preparations will have to be carried out to ensure that the right people are there and appropriate support is provided by friends, translators or advocates, but not legal representatives.
I'll have Nina with me. She's from our local support group and she's been through mediation with her own son, so it'd be good to have her on my side.
Oh. Hello Jane, how are you?
Hi Lenny, how are you?
Good to see you. Jane Fitzpatrick, who is responsible for coordinating special educational needs at Daniel's school, will be at the mediation. That's good. I know she'll follow through on anything we agree today.
Everyone will have received copies of the same paperwork, and there should be no surprises on the day. When everyone arrives in the room, they should be expecting the right number of people and should have had the opportunity to object in advance to anyone's presence, including the mediator.
For this mediation, the different parties are meeting together, but we could just as well have held separate meetings, okay? Right. Good morning. My name is Gloria Wilson and I'm your mediator for today. Let's start by introducing ourselves. I know you lot have all met.
The mediator starts off the mediation by checking what people wish to be called and saying a little about their background. The mediator will then introduce the process and his or her role. People will already have seen this in writing. This gives them time to reflect and to think about what they want to say. He or she will then introduce some ground rules.
One of the ground rules I would like to suggest is that you try not to interrupt each other. Does that sound acceptable? That's good. Are there any other ground rules you'd like to suggest?
The mediator will then continue with the introduction, trying to engage each of the parties in turn.
I'm a freelance mediator. I have no prior knowledge of the issues you're bringing to the table today, except these.
As far as possible, the mediator needs to be seen by the parties as impartial and neutral. That should have been checked out in advance.
You should have had the chance to read a little about me and agree with the appointment. Is that so?
The parties should have had an opportunity to object.
My role here today is to be facilitator, to help you to discuss and explore the matters.
The mediator is there as a facilitator and will not impose an agreement or offer advice or solutions.
Mrs. Brown, you do realise that if you're not happy with the outcome today, you can still appeal to the tribunal.
If, following the mediation, the parents are still unhappy, they won't lose their right to take the matter further.
Quickly for Daniel, so that he can return to school.
Yes, it's fine. Mediation is voluntary and therefore you are free to leave.
Both or all of the parties are there voluntarily and can leave at any time.
I would ask that if you feel unhappy with the way things are going, you have a word with me. However, if at the end of the session you agree that...
Everyone present is there to try to resolve matters. That resolution may not always be an agreement, but a new understanding, a new way of communicating.
And we'll come to the resolutions that you're seeking in a moment. Can you each confirm that you have the authority to settle the disagreement?
The people in the room must have the power to settle the dispute without referring to a higher authority. Sometimes boundaries have to be drawn within the dispute to say what can be dealt with there and then, and what may need to be dealt with later.
I'm not sure what you mean, authority to settle.
Mediation is confidential, and that means that anything said in this meeting cannot be disclosed unless you both agree. However, there are some limits.
Confidentiality is very important. However, certain boundaries are necessary, such as disclosures of abuse and the provision of feedback to the education authority. It's also important for people to know that agreements can be made binding and then become public documents. Once these early stages are out of the way, the mediator lets the parties introduce the issues and set the agenda.
Right. If there are no further questions, Mrs. Brown, can you tell us the issues you're bringing to the table today?
Well, basically, Daniel's just not right. He's struggling to keep up with his work. He says he doesn't want to go to school. And every time I go up to school and ask for help, they just say that everything's okay. So I want an assessment, and I don't want to let Daniel back to school until I think everything's okay.
Feeding back the opening statements in the parties' own words works better than changing them into the mediator's vocabulary.
Thank you, Mrs. Brown. Tell me if I've understood you correctly. You're worried about Daniel, you think he's struggling, but when you go to speak to the school they say he's okay. You want him assessed?
Yes, that's right.
Thank you, Mrs. Brown. Lenny, would you like to tell us the issues you're bringing to the table?
I'm sorry you're worried about Daniel, Mrs. Brown. It seems to me we have a couple of problems. The main one is that Daniel's not in school at the moment. We also need to look at what the school is doing to support Daniel.
Okay, thank you. It seems you both have concerns about Daniel's progress and the way it seems to affect his attendance at school. Mrs. Brown, you said that Daniel has mentioned he's concerned about going back to school without more support. Lenny, you've also mentioned looking at the support the school can provide. From what you've already said, it seems the areas you've both identified include Daniel's return to school, his attendance and the support he gets in lessons.
The mediator has already pointed to some areas of agreement. Her role now is to assist the parties to explore the issues in more depth.
Miss Fitzpatrick, you've mentioned about the way in which Daniel's work is explained to him. Can you say a little more about what you mean by that?
The way a teacher prepares work for all the children in the class is by differentiating. That means each child will be asked to approach a task in a different way or given different tasks according to their abilities or needs. Now I think English is working well because in that his teacher is giving a framework for Daniel's writing. That helps him with structure. I know he uses a word bank, and that also helps.
Having explored the issues in more depth, the mediator looks to the future and asks the parties for outcomes they'd be happy with.
Miss Fitzpatrick, from the discussions we've had today, are there any things that the school might put in place to help Daniel more?
I think we need to make sure that the curriculum is differentiated and that all Daniel's teachers are aware of the strategies that will support his learning.
What does that mean?
Well, all Daniel's subject teachers need to be aware of the kinds of strategies Mr. Andrews is using in English to support Daniel's writing. I'll make sure that his teachers make sure that Daniel's understood any task that they have set and make sure that he's not asked to do more writing than he's able to tackle in the time allowed. I think we need to provide each of Daniel's teachers with a brief summary of what his difficulties are and suggestions about the kinds of things he finds most helpful, and then we'll review things.
Okay. Mrs. Brown, how does that sound? Is there anything specific you'd like to see?
If all the teachers make changes and he still doesn't progress, what then? Will Daniel ever get the assessment before it's too late?
We need to give this programme time to work, and Daniel needs to be in school every day. Now, if he's attending school and after 6 months of this new approach he's still having problems, then we'll be happy to look at a further request for a statutory assessment.
Mrs. Brown, how's this sound to you?
Well, fair enough. I guess she does need time to talk to the other teachers. I like the idea of Daniel being part of the meeting. Perhaps we can make it a three-way agreement. But I want Daniel assessed after 6 months if there's no change.
During the mediation, the mediator allows people breaks so that they can talk to their supporters. The mediator also uses this opportunity to consult with both parties to see if they're happy with the way things are going. If emotions are running high, separate meetings can be a good way to let things cool down.
I am sorry to see that you're upset. Is there anything you
GP. Well,
Agreements can only be made binding if both parties agree. A break between the mediation and the agreement stage should always be suggested.
Daniel's attendance isn't...
This reinforces the end to the confidential and voluntary process.
The first agreement you made is about Daniel's lessons. Mrs. Patrick has agreed to talk to each of his subject teachers and to work out a plan with them. She'll then arrange a review in 6 weeks. Is that okay, Mrs. Patrick?
Fine.
Mrs. Brown?
yeah, that seems good.
Would it make sense for you to pencil in a date before you leave? Alright, that's good. Just one last thing. None of us can speak for Daniel. All we can say is that he is invited to the meeting and we hope he'll attend. If he doesn't want to come, will you come alone, Mrs. Brown?
Yes, of course.
Well, that's all the agreements I think we've made today. You both said at the beginning that you wanted the agreements to be binding. Is that still the case for both of you?
Yes.
Then give me a moment before you leave to photocopy these agreements and I'll hand you one copy. These now become public documents, okay? Good. Well, I'll just tear up the notes I've made. All that's left for me to do is to thank you for your enthusiasm and honesty, but most of all for your courage in agreeing to mediation and participating with such goodwill. Thanks.
In the case we've just seen, agreements were reached for actions to be taken. This doesn't always happen, but even if there's no resolution, progress has still been made in terms of getting people to talk to each other again and an improved understanding of the issues. Following the mediation session, questionnaires are used to investigate how the parties felt about the process in order to evaluate and make improvements to the service. No questions are asked about the agreements because they're between the parties themselves.
What you have is a process which allows both parties to come out of that process feeling comfortable with the resolutions, as opposed to people having to give up something or having to feel that they've lost something in the process.
What's good for me is that it brought two people together to talk about a very important young man who should have got together months and months ago.
Mediation puts the responsibility for the problem and the resolution in the hands of those in dispute. It's not about winning or losing, but about increasing understanding and getting those in dispute to sort out the problems.
It enabled us to talk and listen to each other. So I would definitely recommend it.
Even though there may not be a written agreement, the fact that people have sat down in the same room, articulated their arguments and have been heard by the other people, and may be more respectful of each other at the end of the day, to us that's some level of success.
A lot of the sort of skills or the processes used in mediation, I think, are ones that you should use in everyday life, where you allow people to make their own decisions.